Well, let's take it to Scotland, where we can talk to the SNP's Foreign Affairs and Europe spokesman, Stephen Gethins. And it's good to see you this morning. And it's good to have you on because what we don't get to do often south of the border, if you like, is properly look at the domestic agenda in Scotland and what you are actually offering Scottish voters. So can we work through some of that? And kick off with education, because we know Nicola Sturgeon said when she became First Minister that education was her top priority. Why is it that the education system in Scotland seems to be underperforming compared to where it was a few years ago?
Well, look, one thing that the Scottish Government does, and it's focused on its domestic agenda and focused on delivering, and I'm somebody who sits at Westminster, where every time a UK government tries to fulfil a legislative agenda, it falls flat on its face and we end up in snap elections and chaos. And one of the things that they've tried to do is John Swinney in particular doing a good job of trying to look at the whole different areas so that, you know, look at poverty, look at these areas that might impact on pupil performance, and that's clearly the right thing to do. And I have to say it stands in stark contrast to the chaos that I witness on a day-to-day basis during my time in Parliament at Westminster over the past 4.5 years.
Yeah, but I mean, documents released in September said that higher exams in Scotland at the lowest level in a decade. Exam rates have fallen every year except the National 5 level. Year-on-year pass rates are down anywhere between 1.1 and 3.6%. I mean, whatever is happening in the rest of the country, that's ultimately the SNP's responsibility, isn't it?
Well, yet, and if you look at those figures, you'll see that more pupils are going on to positive destinations. And part of that was when the SNP came into power, you scrapped tuition fees. You know, the university sector is really important where I am, and that's incredibly important for sending more students on to positive destinations, regardless of their background, based on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. But there are more substantial issues that we need to deal with at this Westminster election, and it is a Westminster election. A decade of austerity, first under the Tory Liberal administration and then under the Tories, has an impact on public services. You cannot have continual salami slicing and not expect it to have an impact. Now, the Scottish Government has tried to offset that by raising taxes very slightly for those who are better off, with the vast majority being slightly better off or no worse off. And that's the right thing to do, and they're focused on that. And you have to remember, the Scottish Government fulfils its legislative agenda. The UK Government is nowhere near getting involved in this, with issues like domestic violence bills being dropped because of the chaos and confusion at Westminster. The Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government, is getting on with the job on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, is it really, when you talk about domestic violence and issues of that nature, what about the drug problem? You've got the worst drug addiction problem in Europe, and the budget was cut by £50 million.
Well, you're absolutely right to raise that, and that's a good point. And that's a human tragedy, and let's not forget the human tragedy at the heart of the drug crisis throughout the United Kingdom. And one of the areas that the Scottish Government has looked at has been looking at safe rooms. That's something that's practised elsewhere in Europe and in Canada as well, and that's managed to bring down drugs deaths. And that's something that was backed, and devolution of those powers was backed by the cross-party Scottish Affairs Select Committee. So when you have a problem, you identify what could possibly be a solution. That's the stuff of governance. That's the stuff of sensible governance. And for the UK Government to refuse to devolve those powers, even though it's something that could be tried, could make that better, makes you wonder about that dogma to try and centralise by the UK Government. There's a solution that could try and tackle that human tragedy. The Scottish Government have called for it, the cross-party Scottish Affairs Select Committee at Westminster have called for it, and yet Westminster and the Tories stand in the way of trying to make some progress. Yeah, but
why is everything that goes wrong being palmed off at being at the fault of Westminster? When obviously there are issues there are issues that the SNP can address directly within the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen drug-related deaths almost doubling in 8 years to become the highest in Europe. Now, whatever the processes, the policies, and the protocols from Westminster, you can take further action on that, can't you?
wait a minute. I'm sorry, and I have to... Here we've got a situation, and the drugs one's a really good one to raise, that any government, regardless of colour, and I think there are right-thinking people across the political spectrum who are trying to think, how do we deal with this tragedy? Now, you have the Scottish Affairs Select Committee, cross-party, Labour members, Conservative members, SNP members, working on a cross-party basis. It's one of the few areas I think works very effectively at Westminster, the Select Committee system, have identified this as a possible solution. Now, we have a Westminster election campaign. That's what people will be voting on in a week and a half. The Scottish Government have said this could be a possible solution. There is no one-size-fits-all, but that could be a possible solution to this particular crisis. And so the SNP have put that in their manifesto. I'm standing on that manifesto, and that's something that SNP MPs will fight for if elected in a week and a half. And incidentally, the Scottish Government, looking at this issue, have identified this as a possible solution. It's a bit like minimum pricing for alcohol, which was rejected for so long by Westminster, worked up in Scotland, and then was copied elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Look, if there's a potential solution, then let's look at it. And I'm not saying that this will be the magic bullets, but let's give it a try. There's a human tragedy in terms of drug deaths out there. Give it a shot.
I'm sorry to say we've got to leave it there. It's been very good to talk to you this morning. Thank you.